Have you ever imagined being judged just by your appearance? Have you ever felt the weight of prejudice without anyone even knowing who you really are? Because this story will move you. Snoop Dogg, one of the most iconic artists in the world, went through a situation that no one expected. A humiliating mistake, a blatant injustice, and a turnaround so shocking that it left everyone with their mouths open. But, as they say, karma never fails. And the security guard who dared to stop a legend was about to learn that in the hard way. Now just imagine, you arrive at a gala event, a place where only the most influential can enter. Everyone around was wearing designer clothes, arriving in luxurious cars, and being welcomed with a red carpet. But suddenly, you are stopped at the door. The security guard's look of contempt is clear. He doesn't even ask your name. He just crosses his arms and with an arrogant tone says, "This is not your place." The public humiliation is evident. The silence around increases the discomfort. Some people watch, but no one dares to intervene. After all, no one wants to risk their own position to defend a stranger. But what no one there knew was that this stranger wasn't just anyone. He was not an invader. He was not a stranger. He was simply the main attraction of the event, and it is exactly at this moment that the situation begins to take an unexpected turn. While the security guard maintains his rigid posture, convinced that he is just doing his job, a buzz begins to emerge around him. Someone whispers, "Wait, doesn't this guy look familiar?" Another takes out his cell phone and starts recording, feeling that something big is about to happen. But the security guard still doesn't notice. He has no idea that you are just seconds away from making the mistake that would change your life forever. And even worse, everyone there was about to witness his arrogance turn into pure regret. Now I ask you, what would you do in this situation? Would you accept the humiliation in silence, or would you give back in the best way possible? Because what Snoop Dogg did next, no one could have predicted. Los Angeles, the city where the spotlight shines brightest, where only the most influential and powerful attend the most exclusive events. That night, a gala event brought together the biggest names in the music, film, and business industries. It was one of those parties where luxury and prestige dictated the rules. The red carpet was rolled out, camera flashes exploded every second, and guests arrived in million-dollar cars, wearing the most expensive clothes from the most famous brands in the world. Journalists fought for space to interview celebrities. Influencers broadcast everything live to millions of followers, and photographers did everything they could to capture every detail of that universe inaccessible to most people. Inside the event, expensive champagnes were served in crystal glasses, while waiters circulated with trays of appetizers worth more than many people earned in a month. Everything was perfectly planned for a night of pure glamour and status, but not everything at that party would go as expected. Outside, an unexpected scene was about to unfold, something that would completely change the course of that night and become one of the most talked about moments of the event, and not for the right reasons. It was then that Snoop Dogg arrived. No fanfare, no security guards, no ostentation, just him, wearing simple clothes, without any flashy brands, without the traditional diamond necklaces that rappers usually display. He seemed like just another ordinary man in a sea of billionaires and socialites, and that's exactly what caught my attention, but not in the right way. The security guard, a tall, strong man with a closed expression, watched Snoop Dogg approach. His eyes analyzed every detail of the rapper, from his clothes to his carefree way of walking. And in a single second, he had already decided that man didn't belong there. Without even asking her name, without checking the guest list, without hesitating, he raised his hand to block the passage. "This is not your place." The tone was dry, merciless. Snoop Dogg stopped. He looked at the security guard, then at the event inside, where the camera flashes were blinking non-stop. He smiled lightly, a calm, unhurried smile. It wasn't the first time someone had underestimated him. "I think you're making a mistake, partner," the security guard laughed, a low, almost mocking laugh. "The only mistake here would be to let you in. This party is for VIP guests, important people." Snoop Dogg did not immediately respond. He just tilted his head a little, as if absorbing every word, every look of contempt. Around, some people began to realize what was happening. One or two eyes turned to the scene, but no one intervened. It was always like this. When someone was treated with disdain, when an injustice happened, most people preferred to pretend they didn't see it. After all, why get involved? And this silence, this passivity, only made everything even more humiliating. Snoop Dogg took a deep breath. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone, but there was something about that situation that deeply bothered me. It wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about being barred from an event. It was about how quick people were to judge each other, based solely on appearance, without even bothering to find out the truth. And there was a security guard who thought he knew everything, who judged, who humiliated, who laughed with disdain, without even imagining the absurd mistake he was making. At that moment, a journalist, positioned near the entrance, noticed something strange. He frowned, pulled out his cell phone and started recording. Something told him that this was going to pay off, and he wasn't wrong. Because what would happen in the next few minutes would be one of the greatest lessons that security guard has ever received in his life. And now I want to know your opinion. Have you ever been in a similar situation where you were judged without anyone knowing who you really were? Have you ever felt the weight of prejudice, contempt, or injustice? Tell us here in the comments, because I read them all. This story is a powerful reminder that we should never underestimate anyone. Respect is the basis of everything, and often life has a way of teaching this lesson in the most unexpected way possible. The security guard that night thought he was in control. He thought he knew exactly who should go in and who should stay out, but he was about to discover that fate had other plans for him. So before we continue, leave a like on the video because it really helps to bring more stories like this. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content, and activate the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. And tell me here in the comments, what would be your reaction if this happened to you? Would you leave quietly or give change somehow? Right here. I want to know your opinion, but hold on, because the story is just beginning. In the next few minutes, everything will change. The mistake has already been made, but the consequences are yet to come. The security guard still didn't understand, but he was about to experience the greatest humiliation of his life. And when the truth came out, it was already too late. That night was full of shine, flashes, and exclusivity. Celebrities walked the red carpet, guests greeted each other with practiced smiles, and the press pushed each other to get the best photo. But outside, something completely unexpected was happening. While the rich and famous passed through the main entrance without difficulty, one of music's greatest legends was being blocked, and all because someone thought they knew exactly who deserved to be there and who didn't. Snoop Dogg arrived at the event without security, without pomp, without needing to prove anything to anyone. With an unmistakable style, but without ostentation, he wore casual clothes and a cap. Simple, comfortable, without drawing unnecessary attention. He knew who he was, he knew what he represented. But the security guard at the door, this one had no idea. As Snoop Dogg approached, the security guard quickly took his position. He didn't ask for his name, he didn't check the list, he didn't do anything other than cross his arms and give him a look of contempt. A look full of judgment, the kind of look that says, "You don't belong here." He didn't even hesitate before giving his sentence. "Hey man, this event is for important guests." Snoop Dogg, without showing surprise or indignation, just smiled sideways. He'd already been through a lot in life. He'd already been judged in every possible way, but there was always someone new ready to make that mistake again. I know. The answer was short and direct. But the security guard didn't move. He didn't ask who Snoop Dogg was. He didn't check the guest list. For him, it was already clear. That man, in simple clothes, had nothing to do there. Silence hung in the air for a few seconds. Snoop Dogg didn't back down, nor did he try to argue right away. He just watched. Around him, some people began to notice the situation. Curious looks turned towards the entrance, but no one spoke. Everyone preferred to watch rather than intervene. The security guard snorted impatiently, staring at the rapper as if he were dealing with someone inconvenient. "Look, I don't want to create problems here, but if you don't have an invitation, it's best to leave." Snoop Dogg raised an eyebrow. He could just tell who it was. I could pull out my cell phone, make a quick call, and sort everything out. But at that moment, he wanted to see how far it would go. He wanted to see how much the security guard would insist on this mistake. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, with a calm tone, without changing his voice. The security guard took a step forward, trying to impose himself even more. Absolute. The arrogance in the response was evident. For him, this was just another night at work. He was used to blocking people who didn't belong to that world of luxury. In his mind, he was just doing his job, making sure no one unwanted got in. What he didn't realize was that he was about to make one of the biggest mistakes of his life. Snoop Dogg crossed his arms, keeping his expression calm. He could just turn around and walk away. But there was something about this situation that made him want to wait just a little longer. He wanted to see the security guard's reaction when the truth finally came out. On the other side of the entrance, some people inside the event began to notice the strange movement. The organizer, busy welcoming guests, looked towards the door, not understanding what was happening. At the same time, a journalist nearby noticed something strange about the scene. He frowned, pulled out his cell phone, and began recording discreetly. Experience told him that something here was about to become news, and he was right, because in the next few minutes everything would change. The security guard's arrogance would soon turn to despair. And when he finally realized who was blocking him, it would be too late. Now I want to know, have you ever seen someone judged for no reason? Have you ever witnessed an injustice like this and had the feeling that something was wrong? Comment here and tell me. I want to know your opinion on this story, and leave a like to strengthen the channel, because the most unbelievable part of this story is yet to come. What happened next? No one could have predicted the security guard gave a crooked smile, the kind of smile that doesn't express sympathy, but rather contempt. He shook his head, as if he were dealing with someone who simply didn't understand his position. His gaze roamed Snoop Dogg up and down, as if trying to find some sign that the man in front of him was important. But in his mind, there was nothing there that justified allowing him entry. For him, it was simple. There were the powerful, the millionaires, the truly influential, and that man, with his casual clothes and without the slightest concern for showing off, could not be part of this select group. I already told you, man, this event is not for you. Better leave before I have to call someone to get you out of here. The security guard's tone was authoritarian, confident, filled with the certainty that he was in control of the situation. But he had no idea what a mistake he was making. He was about to humiliate one of the most influential men in music, someone who could, with a simple phone call, cause him to lose his job that very night. But at that moment, the security guard did not have that information, and his arrogance only increased. Snoop Dogg remained calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get excited. But his gaze was fixed on the security guard, as if he was waiting for the right moment for the truth to come out. Meanwhile, the people around began to realize what was happening. Some guests who were entering stopped for a moment, exchanging quick glances with each other, trying to understand what was going on. One of them seemed to recognize Snoop Dogg and lightly poked his friend next to him, who also looked in the rapper's direction. But nobody said anything. That's the problem. In situations of injustice, many people just watch. They realize that something wrong is happening, but they prefer not to get involved. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of self-indulgence, maybe because they think it's not their problem. But silence in these moments can be as cruel as injustice itself. The security guard, noticing that some people were watching, seemed to feel even more entitled to reinforce his point. He let out a low laugh, full of mockery, and crossed his arms. "Dude, seriously, do you really think you can come in here like this? You didn't even try to dress properly. This isn't just any event, partner. This is a place for classy people. You know, celebrities, business people, important people." The sentence fell like a bomb. The mockery was evident. The arrogance overflowed. The security guard wasn't just blocking Snoop Dogg from entering. He was trying to put him down, making a point of reinforcing that, in his view, the rapper simply didn't fit into that environment. And all around, people began to react. One of the journalists who was covering the event noticed the scene and pulled out his cell phone, discreetly starting to record. Something told him that this would make an interesting story. One of the guests whispered to the other, "Wait, isn't this guy Snoop Dogg?" The friend's eyes widened. It can't be. If it were, they would have let him in by now. But the two continued to watch. The tension in the air was almost palpable. It was as if everyone was waiting for what would happen next. Snoop Dogg, in turn, remained impassive. He had been in situations like this before. The world was full of people who judged others by their appearance, who believed that money and status were synonymous with value. He knew that these types of people would always exist. But something that night felt different. Maybe it was the public around. Maybe it was the way everything was happening in broad daylight, in front of so many witnesses. Or maybe it was because this time, everything was being recorded. The security guard stepped forward and gestured with his hand, pointing toward the street. "Come on, partner, I don't want to create confusion, but you have nothing to do here. Better to go your way." That was the moment when some people really started whispering. Someone commented quietly but still audibly, "I can't believe this guy is blocking Snoop Dogg." The security guard, distracted by his own certainty that he was right, did not notice the murmurs. But Snoop Dogg got it. He noticed the looks of some people around him, saw how cell phones began to be discreetly raised. The cameras were on. The internet in a few minutes would know everything. The rapper let out a sigh, as if he was giving the security guard one last chance. "You really don't want to look at the guest list?" he asked, his voice still calm, still calm. The security guard let out another short laugh, shaking his head. "Dude, you don't even need it. I know who gets in here and who doesn't." Snoop Dogg raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah." And it was at that moment that someone inside the event finally realized what was happening. The organizer, who was greeting some guests, turned his face and saw the movement at the entrance. He noticed the security guard with his arms crossed, blocking someone, and then he recognized the man standing outside. His face paled. His eyes widened, as if his brain took a few seconds to process the scene before him. Then, without hesitation, he began to move quickly towards the door. Journalists, noticing the movement, began recording more intensely. Cell phones went up. Something was about to happen, and everyone wanted to capture the exact moment the truth would be revealed. And the security guard, he was still there, arms crossed, convinced he was right, convinced he was in control of the situation, but control was about to slip completely out of his hands. Snoop Dogg remained there, motionless, with a half-smile on his lips, watching the security guard, as if he was giving him the chance to correct his mistake. He didn't seem angry. He didn't seem in a hurry. It was almost as if he was curious to see how far this man would take this situation. But the security guard, completely blinded by his own pride, didn't notice the tension in the air. didn't notice the discreet looks turning towards him, and much less noticed that some people had already started recording the scene. "Look, partner, I'll say it again for the last time. You're not on the list, so get lost." The tone was impatient, almost mocking. He spoke loud enough for everyone around him to hear. He wanted to appear in control. He wanted to make it clear that he was in charge, that he would not accept arguments. For him, that man in simple clothes was just another man trying to infiltrate where he didn't belong. Snoop Dogg took a deep breath, remaining calm. He could just say his name. He could get it over with in a single sentence, but something inside him told him to wait a little longer. He wanted to see how far that security guard would go. And more than that, I wanted to see the reaction of the people around when the truth was revealed. Some guests were already exchanging glances. Murmurs arose here and there. "Dude, I'm pretty sure that's Snoop Dogg." "It can't be. If it were, they would have let him in by now." "I don't know. But if it's him, this security guard will regret it bitterly." On the opposite side of the entrance, a journalist who was covering the event had already taken out his cell phone and was filming everything. He knew Snoop Dogg from afar, there was no doubt. He knew he was about to capture a moment that would quickly take over the internet, the kind of video that would go viral in a matter of hours. The security guard, however, remained firm in his stance. He didn't even bother to check the guest list. For him, if that guy was really important, he would have been recognized immediately. His arrogance showed in the way he crossed his arms, in the tone of voice full of authority he used to push the rapper away from the entrance. "You can't just come here and think you can just walk in. This isn't just any place. There are a lot of important people in there. So do yourself a favor and leave before I have to call someone to get you out of here." Snoop Dogg smiled, a smile that didn't express amusement but rather patience. He was giving the security guard one more opportunity to realize what a stupid thing he was doing. But the man didn't catch the signals. He didn't see the looks around him. He didn't notice the cell phones filming every detail. "Are you sure about this, partner?" Snoop asked, his calm voice contrasting with the rising tension around him. "Absolute." The security guard responded without hesitation. It was at that moment that something began to change. The event organizer, who until then had been busy welcoming VIP guests, noticed the strange movement at the entrance. He saw the security guard blocking someone, saw the confused expressions of some guests, and for a moment he felt a discomfort that he couldn't explain. Then his gaze fell on the man standing outside. The impact was immediate. His heart raced. His face lost color. He blinked a few times, as if he needed to confirm that his eyes weren't playing a trick. But there was no doubt. It was him. Era Snoop Dogg. The organizer almost dropped the glass he was holding to fall to the floor. He held his breath for a moment, then took a hasty step towards the entrance, but without attracting attention. He needed to act quickly. The last thing I wanted was a scandal. But it was already too late. The scene was already recorded. The video was already being sent to message groups, shared on social networks, gaining momentum. And the security guard, he still hadn't noticed anything. He was still standing there, steady, full of confidence, thinking he was just doing his job. The organizer quickened his pace, his heart pounding in his chest. He needed to get there before this went too far, before one of music's greatest living legends decided it was no longer worth pushing. But at that moment, Snoop Dogg didn't seem bothered. He seemed curious to see the exact moment when that security guard would realize the mistake he had made. And once that happened, there would be no going back. Now tell me, what do you think will happen when the security guard finally finds out who was stopping him? Have you ever seen someone make such a big mistake that they didn't realize it until too late? Comment below. And if you think that respect should come before appearance, leave a like on this video, because the most unbelievable part of this story is about to happen. The event organizer quickened his pace. his heart pounding in his chest. The scene he saw before his eyes was so absurd that he could hardly believe it. Snoop Dogg, one of the most important guests that night, was standing outside, prevented from entering by a security guard who, without knowing it, had made one of the biggest mistakes of his life. The organizer's expression instantly changed, turning from astonishment to despair. He knew this could become a scandal. And worse, he knew it was already too late to prevent the situation from spreading. As he tried to push his way through the crowd that had formed around the entrance, tensions rose. The whispers turned into more audible conversations. Some people were already looking at the security guard with expressions of disbelief. Others began shamelessly filming. The journalist who was already recording adjusted himself, realizing that he was about to capture the exact moment of the turning point. But the security guard, completely unaware of what was to come, still maintained his arrogant stance. He crossed his arms, looking at Snoop Dogg as if he had won an imaginary argument. "I already told you, man. If you don't have an invitation, you can't enter." Snoop Dogg remained still, without changing his expression. He didn't seem angry, he didn't seem anxious. In fact, his gaze had a touch of amusement, as if he was just waiting for the right moment to watch the despair take over the man. It was then that the organizer finally arrived at the entrance. As soon as he saw the security guard blocking Snoop Dogg's path, he almost lost his breath. His face turned red, his eyes widened, and without thinking twice, he practically screamed, "What are you doing?" The security guard, who until then had been so sure of his decision, was startled by the organizer's altered tone of voice. He blinked a few times, confused but still maintaining his authoritative pose. "I'm doing my job, sir. This guy is not on the guest list." The organizer felt a shiver run down his spine. He looked around and saw cell phones recording people's shocked expressions. That moment was being recorded for eternity. He would need to act quickly to try to salvage the situation, but he knew that no matter what he did, the damage had already been done. "Do you have any idea who he is?" he snapped, his voice thick with disbelief. The security guard frowned, starting to feel the tension in the air. He glanced at Snoop Dogg, then turned his gaze to the organizer. "Who is he?" he asked, still not realizing the size of the error. The organizer's expression was a mixture of anger and despair. "He's Snoop Dogg." The words came out so loud and clear that even the people furthest away could hear them. The effect was immediate. There was a sudden silence, followed by intense murmuring. Some guests exchanged incredulous glances. The journalist who was filming tried to hold back a smile, knowing that this moment would be worth its weight in gold when it went online. But the best part was the reaction of the security guard himself. He remained completely still. His face paled. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to process the information. His eyes returned to Snoop Dogg, this time analyzing every detail of his appearance, every feature of his face. And then, like an electric shock coursing through his body, he realized it was him. The same man who sold millions of albums, the music icon, the rapper who was in films, commercials, international events. The man who could get into any party he wanted without needing an invitation. The security guard felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. The truth had finally reached him, but it was already too late. The organizer, still trying to minimize the damage, turned to Snoop Dogg, his tone of voice now completely different, full of respect and a bit of desperation. "Mr. Dogg, I apologize for the inconvenience. It was a terrible mistake, and I guarantee it won't happen again. Please come in, everything is already prepared for your reception." Snoop Dogg remained silent for a moment, just staring at the security guard, who now seemed smaller, less confident, lost in his own shame. The rapper then took a step forward, stopping right in front of the man who, minutes before, had treated him with contempt. He could say anything at that moment. It could humiliate him. It could demand that he be fired. It could make the security guard feel all the arrogance he demonstrated. But instead, he just smiled slightly and said something that made everyone around hold their breath. "I warned you, partner." Simple, direct, and with a weight that made the security guard lower his head, completely defeated. The organizer hurried to make room, inviting Snoop Dogg to enter. But at that moment, the internet was already doing its job. The video of the humiliation was already circulating on the networks. It was already being shared, commented on, going viral in a matter of minutes. And the security guard, who minutes before felt in control of the situation, now could only watch as everything collapsed around him. Silence took over the environment. The security guard was still frozen, his eyes wide, his lips parted, as if his brain had simply locked up at the truth that had just been thrown in his face. His entire body seemed to wither, as if all that confidence and arrogance he exuded minutes before had evaporated into thin air. His gaze went from Snoop Dogg to the event organizer, then to the surrounding cameras, and, finally, to the faces of the guests who now looked at him no longer with respect, but with a mixture of contempt and curiosity. He knew, everyone there knew. He had made the worst mistake of his life. The organizer was still trying to defuse the situation, but it was clear that he was also dealing with enormous discomfort. His sweaty face, trembling voice, and restless hands betrayed his nervousness. He knew that it wouldn't end well. He knew that that moment was already beyond his control. Still, he tried to regain his composure, took a deep breath, and did what anyone in his position would do. "Mr. Dogg, please accept our apologies." His voice was louder than he intended, but he needed to assert himself in the situation. This was a terrible and absolutely unacceptable mistake. This event was designed to welcome you with all the respect you deserve. Snoop Dogg said nothing. He just watched. His gaze, fixed on the security guard, was filled with something that wasn't anger, but wasn't mercy either. It was the expression of someone who knew that the man in front of him was feeling exactly what he deserved to feel. The organizer, noticing that the rapper was unresponsive, immediately turned to the security guard. "How could you make such a mistake?" His voice was filled with suppressed fury. The security guard tried to respond, open his mouth, formulate some explanation that made sense, but nothing came out. His mind was in chaos. Sweat was beginning to run down his forehead. His breathing was heavy. His desperate eyes searched for a way out, but there was no escape. The damage was already done. And then came the final sentence. The organizer turned to two other event employees and, without hesitation, pointed at the security guard. "Get this man out of here now. He doesn't work here anymore." The humiliation was instantaneous. The security guard blinked a few times, as if his mind refused to process those words. His shoulders slumped, his face turned red, then pale. He tried to argue, he tried to say something to defend himself, but no one there wanted to hear his justifications. Nobody felt sorry for him. The two employees approached and firmly held his arms. "Let's go out here," said one of them, pointing to a side exit, so that he wouldn't be taken through the main entrance, and his humiliation wouldn't become even greater than it already was. But it was too late, because, while all this was happening, one of the journalists present had already posted the video on Twitter. The video was already circulating. The title was simple, direct, cutting: "Security bars Snoop Dogg from VIP event and pays dearly for mistake." And as soon as the tweet went live, the internet did what the internet does best. Shares started to skyrocket. The comments exploded. Public outrage grew by the second. Memes started to emerge, jokes were created in record time, and hashtags like Respect Snoop Dogg and Warmanofala quickly rose to the most talked about topics. And the security guard. He still didn't know anything. He still had no idea that as he was being escorted out of the event, his name and face were already being disseminated to millions of people around the world. When he was finally taken to the side street and left there, alone, he pulled out his cell phone, shaking, and unlocked the screen. Notifications exploded, messages, missed calls, social media alerts. He clicked on one of them and saw it. The video, thousands of comments, millions of views. He felt his stomach sink. Every word he had said that night, every look of contempt, every gesture of arrogance, everything was recorded. Everything was there, played out for the world to watch, laugh, and judge. His name was everywhere. His mistake, his arrogance, his humiliation transformed into entertainment for the masses. He wanted to scream. I wanted to go back in time. I wanted to disappear. But there was no going back, and that's how, in a matter of minutes, the security guard who thought he knew everything, who believed he could judge who deserved respect and who didn't, lost everything, lost his job, lost his reputation. And more than anything, you missed the chance to simply treat someone with respect from the start. Snoop Dogg stood at the event's entrance for a few moments, watching security being escorted out. The man who, minutes before, exuded arrogance, full of certainty that he was in control of the situation, now walked with his head down, his shoulders slumped, his face completely pale. His world had crumbled before his eyes in a matter of minutes. The camera flashes kept blinking. Some people were still whispering among themselves, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. The journalist who had recorded everything continued typing frantically on his cell phone, following the flood of shares and comments that spread like wildfire across the internet. The news was already everywhere. The security guard's name was already being discussed by thousands of people around the world. But Snoop Dogg, he seemed unshakable. He didn't show resentment. He didn't show anger. His gaze remained calm, almost as if he already knew everything would happen this way. After all, he had seen this before. He knew how some people were quick to judge, to belittle, to act as if they were above others. But I also knew that destiny always had a way of teaching the right lesson, at the right time. Before entering, he turned and looked directly at the security guard, who was now standing on the sidewalk, completely lost, holding his cell phone shaking, watching his own life fall apart in real time. He couldn't even look Snoop Dogg in the eyes, but the rapper didn't need him to do that. His voice sounded calm but loaded with meaning when he finally broke the silence. Treat everyone with respect, not because they might be famous, but because it's the right thing to do. The silence was absolute. It was as if everyone there held their breath at the same time. There was no shouting, there was no scandal. Just a simple sentence, but it carried enormous weight. And then he entered. The organizer, still clearly shaken by what had happened, hurried to take him inside, ensuring that everything was perfect for his reception. But outside, people were still absorbing what they had just witnessed. Some guests who had previously been silent were now murmuring among themselves about how foolish that security guard had been, about how his arrogance led to his ruin in just a few minutes. And the internet was on fire. The comments multiplied every second. Some mocked the security guard, others praised Snoop Dogg's patience. Many shared personal stories recounting times when they too were judged based on their appearance or underestimated for no reason. And, among these voices, one feeling stood out, the satisfaction of seeing justice being done. Because that was the true meaning of that story. This wasn't just about a security guard who made a mistake and lost his job. It wasn't just about a celebrity who was blocked and then recognized. It was about something much bigger. It was about character. It was about the way people treat each other when they think no one is watching. It was about respect that should come before appearance, money, status. Because, at the end of the day, respect is not about fame. It has nothing to do with power. It has nothing to do with who is on the VIP list or who wears designer clothes. Respect has to do with character. It has to do with seeing the other as a human being, regardless of anything. And that night, in front of cameras, in front of witnesses, in front of the watchful eyes of the entire world, that lesson was taught in a way that no one would ever forget. And if you followed this story this far, it means you understand the true value of respect, who knows that no one should be judged by their appearance, that each person deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their status or money. So to show that you are part of this team, I want to see everyone commenting below, "Respect is worth more than luxury." I want to see this phrase taking over the comments, because this is the message that needs to be spread. And if you liked this story, leave a like right now. This helps the channel a lot and motivates me to bring more content like this to you. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because there are many more incredible stories coming, and I guarantee you won't want to miss any of them. Now don't leave here yet. Click on the next video that is already appearing on the screen, because there is another unbelievable story waiting for you. I'm sure you will be surprised. See you there.